A long-standing topic that I've been covering for this year has been talking more about how indie game dev has really changed since the 2010s to where it's at now. And a very interesting video popped up that kind of helps cement this topic. So for today's piece, we're going to talk about how much things have changed and what it means for any new or older indie devs trying to make something work in the market today. Fan of the channel and fellow YouTuber Tim Ruswick reappeared after a few years to make a very candid video about why he's no longer doing full-time indie game dev, and there'll be a link to that one down below. And in it, he talked about the struggles he faced with covering indie game dev and trying to make a game on his own. And it's a very interesting look at, I think, kind of how this mentality and what it means to be a game developer, especially an indie game developer, has changed over the past decade. And for people who are new tuning in, when you're looking at the stuff that we do here on the channel, you're not talking to someone who just does like video essays about video games need to be less woke. Game is dying because of this. We need more anime breasts in order to save the industry. You're talking to someone who's been interviewing game developers large and small for over a decade now. I have spoken to developers who were investment bankers who went into game dev. I've spoken to students right out of college, sometimes still in high school, making their very first games. And, I've been around this rodeo many, many times. And listening to Tim talk about some of the challenges he faced, it really, I think, kind of demonstrates a lot of how much game dev has changed and what it really means to be making a game today versus 7 to 10 years ago. The first thing that he said that really stuck out to me was he was talking about kind of like, hitting that wall of being a first-time game developer. He mentioned his background in terms of marketing, and he has been very successful at it. And it kind of hit him very hard about he was not getting people interested in his game. And it kind of was like that crisis of confidence that we see from a lot of people. And it takes me to this very first point about game dev. Another long-standing topic that we've talked about a lot here is the study of game design as its own credible field. That there is a difference between game dev and game design. And when Tim was talking about how having this background marketing was not helping him, it kind of shows, again, how much of a unique element or unique study game design is. As I said, I've spoken to developers who come from very varied backgrounds. And I'm sure there's a few of you watching this right now. You've probably done everything from acting to stock trading. You may be worth many times more money than I will ever be in my life. Here's the truth of the matter. None of that matters when it comes to game dev. Being able to build a game is a very unique study. It's a very unique career. It's not something that you can just walk into one day with background somewhere else and immediately get. And it's, again, why one of the big aspects that we've seen out of indie dev has been amazing games from first-time developers, even more so than that over people who have backgrounds, either in or outside the game industry. Here's a question for everyone watching this. How many times have you seen a game being publicized from, former Activision developers, former EA, Nintendo, whatever? They have backgrounds that many people would kill for. And the game doesn't work. It doesn't look interesting. It doesn't play well. And then we turn to a game from a first-timer or someone who may only have a year or less in terms of background in the game dev space. And it's amazing. It's interesting. It's different. It holds your attention. How many games have we played over the past 5 years that have come from just seemingly out of nowhere to be amazing titles? You look at something like, Lethal Company, that, again, that was from a student first game, and now they're probably set for life or for a very long time. And there's that mentality from a lot of people, especially from people who coming into this indie game dev space saying, well, I have this background doing all this, and this. I worked at major studios. Surely I can make my amazing dream game that no one's ever seen before. And it doesn't work. And again, Tim, this is not a case, I'm not trying to throw shade at Tim, but this is one of those cases where I've seen these tales and these stories many times before. Just as I've interviewed developers who have succeeded, I've interviewed quite a few who didn't, who their first game failed so badly that they left the game industry forever. And it's a very hard thing to talk about. And I'm glad that Tim came back to kind of share his experiences. Because as he was describing the issues he was running into, I'm just sitting there listening to him, nodding my head, because I have heard all this before many times. The kind of shaking your confidence. The fact that if your first game didn't do so well, and then people are telling you, oh yeah, your next game's great, it's amazing, you're going to be fantastic, it's going to do so well, and you're just saying, well, they said the same thing about my first game, so what does this all mean? And it kind of gets at one of the points I've been thinking a lot about in the recent weeks, of how much game dev has really changed from the 2010s to where it is now. And you're going to hear this term once again. And it has to do with being more sustainable in the space. When we talk to a lot of indie game devs who got into this market 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even more than that, a common sentiment that I hear from them is, I'm trying to make my dream game. You know, the one that is going to have at least 3 to 5 years of game development at minimal. And it will keep going no matter how long it takes, no matter how much I struggle. I need to get this game out. And that was the mentality of a lot of the developers I've spoken to in the 2010s. And then I always ask them this follow-up question. And for any one of you game developers watching this, let me know you have a similar answer. What are you going to do after this game is done? And you know what I heard from a lot of them? I don't know. I can't even possibly think about what I'm going to do next after this game is done. I have no idea. And then we fast forward to interviewing a lot of newer game developers. So this is like from 2020, maybe 2021 to today. And if you've listened to these interviews, and even with developers who have been making games for the last 7, 8, 10 years, who are making games today, when I ask them if they have an idea for what they're going to do next, you know what they say? Oh yeah, sure. I'm thinking about doing this, and maybe I'm going to do that, and I have this crazy idea, I'm going to work on this. And they can start thinking of like 3 to 5 different ideas, almost off the top of their head. And again, it's that very different change in what it means to make a game today. We're looking at making smaller, more digestible games, and more importantly, easier to design and develop. As I said a minute ago, if I talked to a game developer in 2014, 2015, they were looking at minimum 3 to 5 years of developing one game. When I talk to game designers today, I'm hearing turnaround times of like 12 to 18 months to maybe 2 to 3 years at most. And for every new game developer watching this, someone who just started this journey in the last 2 to 3 years, I want to ask you this question. How many of you are thinking of making a game that takes 5 to 7 years at minimum to design? How many of you are thinking of making a game that takes 12 months, maybe 13, 14 months, to maybe 2 to 3 years of development? And it really gets at, again, this change in mentality of game dev. That I'm sure every one of those newer game devs has that dream idea that they want to make. And they also know when they're starting out, they are nowhere in the position to make that game. For myself, I have a Word doc of like 4 to 5 of my dream ideas that would probably have minimum 3 to 5 years or more to design. I've also been thinking at some point to really, follow in that route of trying to make something, maybe using a game maker tool of some kind. And do I think I'm going to be making any one of those ideas as my first game? Heck no. If I'm going to make a basic game, it's going to be, or my first game will probably be something like Jumpy Jumpman Has to Cross the Street. And then game number 2 will be Jumpy Jumpman 2. Jumpy Jumpman Has to Cross a Bridge. And then game number 3 will be my magnum opus of combining Ultra Kill with Star Citizen, with Slay the Spire, and a touch of Resident Evil. And surely, with those 2 games under my belt, I'll be able to get that game completely finished in 45 minutes as a solo dev. Game dev has really changed in terms of what it means to survive in this space. And as we've said, making one game is a great thing. It's an accomplishment you should be proud of. But if you want to survive and actually live off of your games, either full-time or part-time, you have to think about the bigger picture. What am I doing a year after this game is out? 2 years? 3 years? What are going to be the next 3 to 4 ideas that we've had? When I interviewed a lot of developers, again in the 2010s, we talked a lot about the studio becoming branded around a singular game genre. If you're a platformer, you're going to make more platforms. First-person shooters are going to be first-person shooters, and you get the picture. But what we're seeing, again, with being more sustainable, is this idea to branch out to very different ideas. Maybe my first game is a platformer. Well, how about I work on a first-person shooter next? And this is not, and to kind of clarify this point, this is not about being wishy-washy. Because this is another thing that we see from a lot of developers who struggle. That I'm going to get 1 year into this first-person shooter, but you know what? Now I need to work on a real-time strategy game. Well, the real-time strategy game is doing okay, but I really want to make a space sim. And right now, a lot of you are probably sweating bullets because you may have had that same thought. What we're seeing is, by focusing on smaller game dev cycles, you have that freedom to keep switching, because if your game only takes a year, maybe 2 years to develop, you can then switch to something else. You can keep those creative juices flowing, keep growing. And more importantly, you keep building a portfolio of great, hopefully, great and finished projects. Because if it takes you 7 years in between each game to get something out, well, we don't have a lot of time on this planet to be pumping out 70 games if it takes you 10 years to make each and every one. And there is a greater discussion to be had about if this means we're going to be losing those giant games, the Stardew Valleys, Disco Elysiums, and so on. But if it means we get more experimental and more stable games, then that may be a price willing to pay. Now, another part about this, and this goes with one of the comments Tim was bringing up in his video, was he felt that the market or his creativity was running up against the market. That if I want to make a first-person shooter in a year of 10 different amazing first-person shooters, then it's not really going to stand out. And right now, as we're talking about this, I have at least 3 to 5 different FPSs in my head that I am chomping at the bit to play when they come out, and I hope they don't all come out in the same year, because it's going to be a nightmare to decide which one is my favorite. We have Ultra Kill, Sulaco, Gloomwood, Cultic, and again, I'm playing on at least 2 or 3 other ones. But you see, here's the point about that. Each one of those games couldn't be further apart from each other in terms of their design and their intended audience. And it kind of gets at this challenge, as we said, of when the market meets your game. The bar of quality when it comes to game dev has grown considerably. As we've said plenty of times over, the days in which you could just release a simple platformer, a simple match 3 game, an auto runner, whatever, or endless runner, are gone. Metroidvania design is another big example. There are a lot of fantastic Metroidvanias that we've played in the last 3 years. But that also makes it a lot harder for the lesser, or the ones that have very apparent flaws in them, to break out. You can put out an amazing game anytime that you want, but you also have to weigh that with what the market is doing. 7, 8 years ago, we were in that period where every game had to be a zombie game, or every game had to have a 4-player horde mode. Remember the time of Evolve, and then to Back 4 Blood and World War Z. And it became very hard for those games to stand out. Today, a lot of us are really looking forward to a new Left 4 Dead style game. Thorn and I have said this many times on our Saturday night plays that we would auto-buy Left 4 Dead 3. But if we're talking about a game that's a very established genre, as we said, with the likes of Bullet Heavens, or this gambling not gambling period that we're in right now, you have to do more than just say, my game's a platformer, my game's a Bullet Heaven, or whatever. And that is very hard to do. And it's not something that everyone can easily do with their games. And again, this is why smaller game dev cycles are very great. If you put out a okay or a decent Metroidvania, and let's say it only took you a year to make, well, it's going to be bad that it didn't exactly blow up, but it didn't really kill you compared to spending 10 years trying to make a Metroidvania. And again, we have seen 8 to 10 year game dev cycles on many different genres. And what will often happen more times than not is that they may be good right out of the gate, but they don't really stick out in the same way that we've seen with smaller, more agile games. And one of the bigger trends when it comes to game dev, again, in the last 5 to 7 years, has been this push to raise the quality of a game. That people are more than happy to spend $19.99, $25.99, $30, $40, $50 if the game justifies it. And that means putting out something that no one has seen before, or no one has seen in this capacity. If you look at something like Blueprints, that Blueprints launched at a $30 price tag, and 10 years ago, a $30 indie game, you might as well charge $100, because who's going to really spend $30 on an indie game? And yet, it is earning a lot of sales. It has gotten massive amounts of attention. I've seen people who have had no interest in puzzle games, adventure games, anything along these lines, streaming it and talking about and covering it. And again, it did that because it was focused on a very specific loop, and it got out there. And I don't know how long Blueprints was in development for. And that is actually a very interesting question. I'm going to do a quick cut and see if I can find that out. So I looked it up, and it was in development for 8 years. And that would put its development starting at around 2018. So it's a very interesting challenge. And again, it kind of raises this point about how long should you spend developing a game? And there's no easy answer to this. To return to Tim's video, he discussed again about this challenge of wanting to switch games or wanting to change things. When he mentioned the game of Battle Barn, he said that he decided to completely change the core gameplay loop. My heart stopped for a second when I heard that. It is very hard to get a game out. And again, especially if you're making something that's very experimental or different. But again, it goes at this idea of what it means to complete a game dev cycle. And how you learn more about this process of designing a game from game to game. And Blueprints, I'm sure, is going to be held up by a lot of people saying, well, that means I should spend 8 years on my game. Maybe I should spend 15 years. I know if I spend 16 years on my game, that's double the amount of development of Blueprints, my game will do double the amount of success. Because, again, that's how it always works. But every game dev, or every game dev cycle is different. And it's, again, why it's very hard to give you exact information about how to succeed. There's one of the things that Tim ran into, that he's putting out all these tutorials about how to get into game dev, and all these useful tips, and then his first game doesn't do all that well. What does that say about your tips? And again, it's a very painful thing to go through. Another point that Tim brought up that is another thing that I've also experienced, at least on a smaller scale, is the nightmare of physical goods, especially when you ship internationally. And I only had to ship out, I think, like 4 of my Josh boxes a few years ago. This was before the whole COVID crisis. And that was a hair-pulling out experience. Maybe if we hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel, I'll do a new Josh box. So, if everyone wants to see me struggle with international shipping, again, start subscribing. But again, it's those challenges when it comes to game dev, and why sustainability matters. Because if you put out one game, and even if it does amazingly well, but it destroys you mentally and physically and financially in the process, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do after that? Or after that? Because at the end of the day, and this is something, again, that I've talked about many times, the true success of a studio is not about putting out one amazing game. It's about having a catalog or a library of amazing and fantastic games. Something that people can point to and say that this studio is consistently putting out great games. That I will buy their next game sight unseen. I will publicize it just by their name because I am so into them. And we've seen studios reach that level. Like New Blood. I think New Blood probably is like the biggest example of it, at least in the recent years. I don't think there's one bad game that New Blood has published or developed in their entire catalog. And that is a very enviable position to be in. But it's something that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of understanding of game dev and the market to do so. And to begin to wrap things up, there's one other point I want to mention, because I think it really gets at how much things have changed. When you see a lot of consultants and people larger in the space talk about how to succeed in game dev, I've heard a very similar mentality of, well, in order to make the best games, you need to go outside of games, take up different hobbies, do other things. And while that does help with getting inspiration and creativity, it doesn't help with building a game. If you want to be able to build amazing games and study and design fantastic titles, you gotta play them. You gotta play all the good, all the bad, all the weird, all the indifferent games. Because as I said at the beginning, your background in other fields, that can help you in terms of kind of the inspiration or having a real world experience with it. That means nothing when it comes to designing effective gameplay loops. It means nothing when it comes to designing and understanding UI UX, building a fantastic GUI for your game, making sure your tutorials work, making sure that you remember volume sliders. Because it doesn't matter how many movies you watch from the Criterion Collection. It doesn't matter if you have spent your entire adult life studying psychology, teaching, engineering, business. Because if you try to build a game in any one of those fields and you don't understand what it means to present that to someone, your game is going to fail. And it's going to fail very hard. And again, you're talking to someone who has seen countless games, who I can spot UI UX issues almost immediately. I have, what was it, like instant heat-seeking UI UX tracking powers when it comes to games. And that came because I studied and played a lot of titles. It's why, like today, just playing amazing games is not going to be enough to help you. And it's why we once again see smaller and kind of unknown developers punching way up with their first or kind of their early games. Because they studied all those games. They played every single platform or a Metroidvania or shooter or puzzle or strategy game that they get their hands on. And they know exactly what gets them excited and what makes them frustrated or annoyed or angry with those games. And you can't just watch footage of games to get that. You have to play and experience these games because that's how you start to understand UI UX. It's why for someone like me, I can point the stuff out having never actually coded a platformer or coded an FPS. Because I have seen every good, bad, amazing, indifferent, disgusting, and wonderful example of that genre. And if you don't do this, and again, it doesn't matter how much money you're worth, how many accolades you have, how many degrees you've earned over your life, your game's gonna suck. And if you don't learn those lessons, it will keep happening again and again and again. So to fully finalize or fully end this video for today, game dev has changed. And if you don't understand how and why it's changed, you are setting yourself up for failure. Or at best, getting a game out there that just lands like a lead balloon. No one's interested, no one plays it, and you're sitting there scratching your head wondering, why is anyone playing this game? And as we've said, game dev is its own unique beast. And it's why you need to do studying. It's why I offer consulting. And as I said, it's also why when I look at these games, my eyes are just, constantly scanning for UI UX issues. Stuff that to me takes seconds to figure out, that for someone who's to the uninitiated could take them weeks or months, or they may never figure it out. How many games have we seen launch with so apparently bad or problematic UI UXs? Stuff that, again, that I can point out immediately, or even for those of you who've been watching, that you see those problems immediately. And then the game developer looks at it and goes, how did I miss that? It takes a lot to just get a single game out there. And maybe someday you'll be seeing Jumpy Jumpman finally available on Steam or on itch. And I'm sure all of you will be waiting and eagerly anticipating reviewing, critiquing that game that's going. So let me know what you think about Jumpy Jumpman down below. And lastly, it's really great that Tim put out that video, because his experience is sadly not unusual when it comes to game dev, but it's a very candid talk about the toils and challenges that come with this. Because at the end of the day, it takes a lot to just make one game, to make an okay game, just make any game. But it's another matter to make a game that's exciting to people, a game that you can market effectively, a game that you can show to people that even in its roughest state, that gets them excited about, and that you can make amazing UI UX for, and you do all the playtesting so you iron out all those issues. And right now, a lot of you have already fainted at your keyboard about all that work, so I'm just going to stop here and let you recover. But with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see what other exciting and so happy topics we'll talk about next on the channel. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.